Well, what's up, guys? Welcome to The Collision. It's Daniel here again, joined at the table with the man, the myth, the legend, the bearded wonder himself, Sam Camp.
Hello, hello.
How you doing?
Doing well.
So we're excited. You may notice some, if you've been following our channel for a while, may notice that it looks a little different. We're excited. This is, before we get into what we're going to talk about in the video, wanted to take a chance to let you guys know what's going on with The Collision, with the new set.
It's looking pretty good. So this, it's just across the room from where we normally film, like all of the movie reviews and that kind of stuff. But we wanted a new set to be used for when we start the fabled, the much discussed Collision podcast.
Yeah, if you've been following The Collision on this channel or on our website from the beginning, we put out pictures and promos for the weekly Collision podcast.
It's been mentioned.
It's been that's about a year ago, and it's still coming. It's like Jesus. We're still waiting. We know it is coming though, but
yeah.
We do have the old set. We're still going to be using that. Obviously, with the COVID, movie theaters aren't open. There's not a whole lot of movie reviews we've been doing. But we're excited. This set is kind of proof that we are moving forward. The podcast is coming. I won't try and put a date on it because that hasn't helped us before. But we are excited about that.
It's much closer than it used to
it's
be.
closer than it was before. But hey, today. So we've, as I said, because of the pandemic and pop culture in a lot of ways has come kind of screeching to a halt. Not a whole lot of movies, a lot of even books and music and stuff is being pushed off due to wanting to wait till it's better time.
Although
to
Taylor
promote.
Swift just released a new album. Not
not even COVID can stop Taylor Swift from releasing more music, for good or ill. But yeah, so we've kind of been taking the chance to not a whole lot of new pop culture. Just to kind of reflect on some of the classics, some of the older stuff. I did a review of Jaws not that long ago, my favorite movie, the objectively greatest movie ever made.
I think there's if you scoot over, you can see.
There will. Again,
magazine.
This set will be evolving. We'll be adding more to it. It's still a work in progress. There'll be more Jaws stuff coming. But we did want to take kind of in that same vein. The Fellowship of the Ring, the first volume of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, was released. Last week was the 66th anniversary. Not quite as impressive as Bilbo's 11th birthday, but it's on its way. And again, if you know much about the books and Tolkien, he always envisioned these books as one story, one book. Due to the size and the price of paper and all that, the publishers insisted that he split it into 3 volumes. But
the fact that you couldn't make a book 6 inches thick,
especially during that time. So really, even though it's the first volume, the Fellowship of the Ring came out, 66 years, and I think the Two Towers came out later the same year, and then the last volume came out early the next year. It was really the start of the Lord of the Rings, one of the most influential stories ever told, one of the most popular. It's been named, Amazon customers. They did a poll not that long ago, and the Lord of the Rings was voted as the book of the millennium.
Oh, wow.
There's been other things where it's been voted as the book of the century, and it's just sort of an interesting book. It's influential. It's really changed the way.
I feel like it's a constant source of inspiration for a lot of people, and it's always there. Like, it's referenced. I mean, it's in some ways it's like Star Wars in that sense that, like, there's always some sort of a reference to it, whether it's just in conversation or in other movies or shows or.
Yeah, in some ways, sort of like, you hear interviews with these directors and stuff, and they're always saying, it was Star Wars where I wanted to become a filmmaker, and that's kind of what Lord of the Rings has been, particularly with fantasy, but also I think just as Christians in Christian art. You have other big fantasy, Game of Thrones, all these other fantasy series. All those authors inevitably point back to Tolkien as the guy that kind of set them down that path of modern fantasy.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd just talk about it a bit. What makes this story, and it's this story written by a very devout Catholic author. What makes it such a cultural phenomenon? I'll show my hand at the front. I'm a huge Tolkien fan. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I'm in deep with it. Maybe we'll.
As evidenced by this is
Yeah, we got Sting.
paraphernalia that has been brought from Daniel's own
Yeah, from my
house.
from my library. This isn't even all of it. So I'm in deep with it. Tolkien for me has been someone that as a author and just as a person, as a philosopher, his approach to art and creativity and theology, all of that has been kind of over the years this a big source of inspiration. I do my pilgrimage to Middle Earth every year. I start each year by reading through the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit books. Just to kind of start each year off on a good foot. See, Sam, you like the stories. You're not
Yeah,
as
and I'll admit that I actually just this year started reading Fellowship of the Ring for the first time. So I've always been a fan, and obviously I've seen the movies, but yeah, I think maybe they were just intimidating books, and so I never, for whatever reason, I never started them. I never tried to read the books, but I started Fellowship of the Ring on audiobook earlier this year, and funny enough, I had checked it out from the library, but it before I could finish it, it expired. So now I'm back. It's back on hold, and so
yeah.
eventually I'll get through those. But yeah, from what I did read, it's I mean, obviously it's way better than the movie. I think there's just so much. We were talking about this a little bit before, but there's just so much richness that Tolkien is actually able to bring into to that world and to the story that, despite Peter Jackson's best efforts, it was not able to cram into even the extended versions
Yeah,
of the movie.
and I know the movies. Some Tolkien purists maybe don't aren't huge crazy about them. Anytime you change a beloved story or adapt it, there's always going to be pushback. I love the movies. I think they
Yeah.
did for what they are. They did a great job. But I thought it'd be good to have Sam here too, because I think sometimes with pop culture stuff, there's almost a mindset that unless you're like obsessed, huge fanboy, all the lore that you have no right to even talk about it. I thought it'd be good to have kind of, I am that person for, I've read multiple biographies on Tolkien. I've done it all.
I watched the Tolkien biopic.
Yeah, which is
as
another,
well, so,
it's another
yeah, okay.
good, there were some historical inaccuracies, but it was a good, another good movie. This sort of in his life, kind of, get to live with him for a bit. But why don't you maybe kick us off? Just what is about, you're more familiar with the movies, but just, those movies capture really the essence. They're pretty faithful to the story in the books.
Right.
What about them kind of draws you in? What about them do you latch on to?
Well, I think it is really just the classic sort of hero's journey narrative. It kind of has all of the elements of a good story. It has obviously it's on an epic scale, and there's like less than human creatures, and there's magic, and so it sort of, I feel like it takes all of the elements of good story and good world building and kind of blends that all together quite well. But I think perhaps at the end of the day, it's really the human element of these characters that go on this quest together. And yeah, it's the classic quest story. Like, you start out from, I'm just a hobbit, minding my own business in the Shire, hoping to inherit Bilbo's estate when he dies. But and then you sort of have this this journey thrust upon you, and this quest to go and to do something beyond yourself. And I think that's what makes it attractive to so many people, is that it's sort of that yearning that I think everyone has at some level, that like they want to do this thing, whether it's on purpose, or it's just that's the lot you're given, and so you have to kind of rise to that occasion. And
Yeah, because you had mentioned earlier, kind of like the Star Wars comparison. Again, you don't want to go too. They are very different, stories and works of art. But in some ways, they do. I think both those stories succeed for the same reason, which you were saying, kind of that hero's journey, the classic tale. There's a lot of parallels with Frodo's journey to Luke's journey.
Right.
Some of the same. Gandalf is kind of an Obi-Wan figure. some of the hobbits or Aragon and stuff. You could maybe say as a Han Solo, and you kind of go into some of that. I know Lucas with Star Wars was deeply influenced directly from
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. Tolkien wasn't as directly, but he was influenced by all the myths that Campbell developed his theory based on, some of the old kind of Norse mythology and all those things. Yeah, and I think it's there's a lot of stories that have done that same. That's the whole premise of the hero's journey, is that it's sort of this universal thing, across all stories and cultures. So there's been so many stories that have had a similar kind of a quest, a humble person drawn into a bigger world, to, big stakes, good versus evil. But for some reason, the Lord of the Rings seems to do it in a way that so many of these other stories just can't quite match. They can't quite get to the level.
Well, I feel like it is sort of the standard that all other fantasy genre epic tales are sort of measured up against. It would seem like it's, like I think anything that comes out that's even remotely in the same genre is there's going to be a comparison. Like, well, is it like, Lord of the Rings, or like, how does it stack up to that? And so I feel like it is sort of the gold standard of, fantasy writing, but then also I think the movies as well.
Yeah, it's kind of continued the kind of the popularity maybe more mainstream with the films, which were massively successful. The Return of the King, the last movie, holds the record for the most Oscars ever won, or Academy Awards won by a movie, with 11. It was nominated for 11, won all 11. Including Best Picture. So super influential. But it's interesting about the movies too, because you think of other similar success stories, like like Iron Man for the superhero, that was a big success, launched this whole explosion in the genre. Things like Twilight and Harry Potter kind of did the same for a time, at least, with the young adult genre. The Lord of the Rings movies come out, they're successful, cultural phenomenon, and I think it's been 17 years since the last one came out, and there hasn't been a successful big budget fantasy film since. It's sort of a rare. I remember when those movies were coming out, a lot of people were predicting that this is going to be the launch of this genre, and it's almost like these films, they're unique, that with these other fantasy films or stories, they're just not engaging in the same way. So kind of in a weird sense, it failed to launch the genre.
Yeah. So what would you say makes this stand out from? Because there are other great books, there are other great movies that have great story, great plot, great characters. So what about this makes it, like, is it just timing? Like, how would you say that? What's the secret to its success, I guess?
And I think there's probably a lot of reasons. Again, if you guys were to share, we'd encourage you to do so in the comments. Let us know if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings. Why are you a fan of it? What draws you into the story? I think we would find that a lot of us latch on to different things in the story, different characters, different aspects of the story. But I personally, my own experience with the story, I think, and it might seem unusual in a way, but I think a big part of the success of the story is the fact that it is such a fundamentally Christian story. I think now with a lot of art and things, there's, it's almost become the butt of jokes. It's a Christian film,
Right.
That means churches are going to flock to it, and everyone else is going to stay, 39 and a half feet away.
Well, I was listening to a song just on Christian radio, and it reminded me of a secular song, and it's just, I kind of just laughed to myself. I was like, okay, yeah, we're still just kind of taking the pop music and sort of putting our Christian spin on it, and that's Christian pop or whatever. And so, yeah, there is certainly this, I think, stigma on Christian art.
Yeah, it's almost, today we're kind of accustomed to the, almost like the fact that something is kind of faith-based is an obstacle to overcome to achieve popularity, and we celebrate when an artist that's a Christian kind of breaks out and achieves mainstream success, and because it doesn't happen as often as but I think because of the way Tolkien told this story, I think the elements of it, without the the more commonplace today preachiness of it, actually did it a lot of favors. Some of the virgins. And I want to read I pulled up a quote. This is sort of a famous quote. If you're a Tolkien fan, you've maybe seen it before. It's in one of his letters where someone asked him about kind of why he wrote the books and all that. So he responded to this reader. It says, "The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in or have cut out practically all reference to anything like religion, to cult or practices in the imaginary world. For the religious element is absorbed into the story and symbolism." And it was interesting because when he first wrote if you kind of go back and read some of the early reviews and stuff, people were confused because there is such a lack of kind of direct, clear, blatant religious elements. The hobbits, none of the cultures seem to have, like gods or deities. There's not like the church of the hobbits. There's
yeah, I mean, I think maybe you would just say it was sort of maybe the good versus evil, sort of perhaps the only two, sort of the wizard class, if you will, are maybe the only things that could maybe be seen as some sort of a god.
Yeah, and if you get into the kind of the Silmarillion and his history, you find he does have a very rich and developed kind of supernatural, with deities and the creation story and all that. But again, that was published after his death. So when the books are coming out, everyone's like, "Well, this isn't. Where's the religion stuff? Aren't you a Catholic?" And I think in that letter, it kind of summarizes his own approach to it, where it's saying, I'm not trying to just take theology and kind of cloak, we're gonna make it with wizards and creatures and dragons, and it's just
There's not that one-to-one sort of comparison.
Yeah, the allegory. And Tolkien, he detested allegory. Multiple times
which is funny because with C.S. Lewis being such a good friend.
And I think that's a good comparison. Again, Tolkien was not a fan of the Narnia books. Lewis loved the Lord of the Rings. Tolkien, he struggled with the overt religious kind of preachiness. But I think those two, because in some ways, whether we kind of realize it or not, especially if you're like a creative and you're a Christian creative, the Tolkien and the Lewis kind of models, if you will, are almost establish the template of how we make art. There's sort of the very subtle kind of absorbed into the art, and then which is more Tolkien. Then you have Lewis, more of this is sort of the word Lewis would use is kind of a re-image. He's taking theology and he's putting it in a new image, a new way of looking at it, just to kind of give another angle in, especially he's writing for children. For children, they become familiar with these theological things in a way that's maybe easier to get into than jump into the Old Testament or directly. But I think because if you think of this, the Lord of the Rings, from a Christian perspective, it is filled not with Gandalf is a Jesus figure and Frodo must, not in that sense, but just kind of the philosophy, the worldview is this sort of it's just saturated with it from the start to the finish of the.
Oh, definitely, and I think that's interesting because it is saturated, but it's difficult to sort of make that one-to-one comparison. Like this represents that, and obviously this was Tolkien's way of pointing to Jesus or the church or any of that kind of stuff. But I think the worldview is what kind of holds the whole thing together.
Yeah, because people have tried to, Gandalf, he sacrifices himself, and he's kind of resurrected.
Sort of
clearly Jesus. But kind of the deeper into his mythology you realize that if you make that direct one-to-one, then you actually end up in a lot of heresy where Gandalf's more of an angel than he is a Jesus figure, and he serves.
Well, and I think that's interesting that it's not, and I think you would agree that I think that's probably what has given this such like stickiness in the pop culture is that he wasn't going for that allegory, that one-to-one. Like it was way more muddled as far as the allegory is concerned, but as far as the worldview and the themes, and the principles were very much baked into the story, the books, the movies. But you couldn't just go like and say, oh, well, that's obviously this and that's obviously that. And so I think that sort of ambiguity in his characters and in the story make it way more accessible to far more people.
Yeah, because it's not like a search and find book where let's find all the religious imagery. And
Right.
again, which is probably not a surprise to anyone, I'm a official card holding member of the Tolkien Society. But even in the society, you have atheists, you have people from other religions, you have people all across the spectrum of worldviews that just love this story and love a lot of the themes and the worldview beneath it, even if they don't go all the way to connect it to Christianity. But you think of sort of some of the main themes of just, self-sacrifice. One of his themes in both The Hobbit and then the Lord of the Rings was what he'd kind of call like the ennoblement of the humble, where you kind of start off with this humble character that's not a big hero, and really never becomes that.
Well, and it's interesting because in the book, it talks about how Gandalf has been very interested in hobbits, but like they're basically not interesting to like anyone else. Like they're just they're kind of a throwaway race, if you will, that like they're not even interesting to any of the other characters or wizards in the story. And because of that, like, they're able to go so far and be successful, because they're so overlooked, both in stature and in just their culture. How he talks about how they just most everyone else except for Gandalf just didn't really think much of hobbits or what they
It's
did.
almost because of their kind of their ordinary ways. That again, that's sort of even what allows the hobbits to carry the ring and not be kind of seduced by it. And I think sometimes the Lord of the Rings gets a bad rap from being like overly simplistic with its good versus evil. I know like George Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones books, he appreciates Tolkien, but he kind of criticizes him, saying, it's in real life, it's not about just if you're evil, you look like an ugly orc. If you're good, you're looking like a handsome warrior, and it's very. But I think it kind of misreads what actually is going on in the story for good and evil. There is that that clear sense that hey, there's good and there's evil. But when you get down to the characters,
there's a spectrum, I think, for sure.
Yeah, it's not and even this sort of what the ring represents is that kind of evil. Evil isn't really its own thing. It's a distortion of what good is. You kind of see like the ring wraiths were men that were turned evil, and they didn't become something new. They just became like a hollow version of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Bilbo starts kind of fading. Gollum's the same way. Even like orcs, if you kind of go into where they came from, we're actually bred from
which you
elves.
have.
Which, if you're like me, they're bred from elves. They're not a new creation. They're just sort of distorting what is good. And I think there's just a lot of rich, from a Christian perspective, of kind of this almost a parable. Tolkien probably wouldn't appreciate that way of looking at it, but of that sort of what evil is, though. It's not. It's something that kind of distorts God's own intention, God's own plan, and kind of changes us. And I think there actually is a lot of deep theology in that.
Right. It's not this separate but equal power, and apart from good, but it's just it's a distortion of the good. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, maybe one other thing that and then we can hear if any themes that stand out to you. One of the things that was actually criticized a lot, super controversial, maybe isn't as much now because we're familiar, but again, we're assuming you guys have read the books or seen the movies if you're watching this. But, again, when at the end of the story, the last book, Frodo gets to the fiery Mount Doom, he has the ring, end of the quest, and he can't do it. He fails. And, ultimately Gollum ends up biting off his finger, falling into the pit. And when the book came out, it was actually quite controversial that this hero that we've been following this whole time, You're supposed to be kind of establishing this world where good guys are successful, and yet you have them fail. Like, isn't that sort of a hopeless end, saying that good can't ultimately overcome evil? And it's interesting because in Tolkien's perspective, that Frodo didn't fail. He failed. He kind of, the power of evil. The burden became too great. But kind of, and some of this even comes out in one of the famous quotes, and I think it's in the movie and the book, about Gandalf saying, who are we to decide who can take a life? Is that power in yours? And in his view, if you trace from Frodo and then back to Bilbo, sort of this pity, the mercy they had, kind of this Christian forgiveness on Gollum. Both of those hobbits have the chance to kill Gollum multiple times. They don't. They kind of let him live. They show
Yeah.
mercy. And in the end, it's not that the Hobbit became this noble hero and threw it in there, and kind of succeeded in that sense. But it's actually his own kind of Christ-like mercy that he showed to this wretched creature. That had he not done that, the good would have lost. He would have failed. But because he acted in that way, in the end, that's what ultimately saved
Hmm.
the world, was that he acted with mercy. And so it's kind of it's interesting. It's sort of a deeper
Yeah.
way to look at at what does it mean to be a hero? Does it mean that you have to, be in all the armor and fighting the last battle, or is it just that you're acting in a way that's virtuous and noble, and kind of in the end, that's what really.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I always just thought it was a bit of a twist of fate that
Plot twist.
yeah, that well, and I think it's interesting that again, I think it comes back to that humanity piece, that with these books and with the movies, there isn't really like a single like hero character. I mean, maybe you could argue that Gandalf is, but he, for various reasons, can't do everything. Um, so I think that the way that it leans so heavily on like the first volume of the book, the Fellowship of the Ring, it is this, a fellowship of people. It's this group of people that have to rely on each other, and no one of them is able to do it. Which I think there's an obsession now that with like sort of the lone hero archetype. It's like, he goes out and does everything, and it's really really hard, and it looks like he's not going to succeed, but somehow by his wit and strength he overcomes. Whereas that's not at all the case with the Lord of the Rings, and even like the character like Sam, like where would Frodo be without Sam? And even that character, like he can't do everything, but he fills that gap that that's necessary for them to accomplish their purpose. But it's not this like lone ranger that goes out and takes the ring all the way. Like there's bits and pieces that have to be filled in with other people.
And I think that aspect of it too, especially in our current time, is so timely. It continues to be
Yeah,
where you have this whole collection of people coming together. They all kind of have different strengths. They all have different roles to play. Some are bigger roles, some are smaller roles. But kind of each character of the Fellowship and kind of the races and stuff that they represent, kind of that unity coming together to kind of push each other on for this. I think themes like that just continue to speak truth. And even though it's a fantasy story,
yeah,
I think and again, we can maybe end with just I think that some of those virtues, some of those kind of longings for good to prevail, for kind of that unity, that purpose, this sort of mercy and all those things. I think whether someone's a Christian or not, we're created by God. We're created kind of for that world, for
yeah,
that to be true. And I think because the Lord of the Rings kind of stripped away some of the kind of jarring preachiness, it kind of some of the things that might be a wall
well, it's
for.
at first a really really good story, like
Yeah, and that's the thing
just
too.
on its own. Like it's an amazing story, and so that alone allows it to stand the test of time. Um, I feel like, and then yeah, there's obviously those themes, those Christian themes that are injected into it in a way that's not off-putting, but are obvious.
Yeah, and it's been those Christian themes have been kind of spreading out and being experienced by people from all different walks of life. Just because it is a great story, it's not a preachy story. It really comes from Tolkien's heart. He spent 16 years or however long he spent to write it.
Yeah.
It really came from his heart, and that heart was one that was, obviously deeply Christian, committed to Christ. But any final thoughts for the? Has our own conversation inspired you to?
No,
to finish the books?
I certainly need to finish the books, and maybe by the end of the year I can at least finish Fellowship of the Ring. But yeah, I think that like what I just said about the fact that it's a really great work of art, and in some ways the fact that it's Christian in nature, I think, is secondary, but it allows it to be experienced by more people, and there aren't any. I don't feel like he doesn't put up any barriers to entry, like other than just believing in the fantasy.
Yeah, I think it's important too. He also doesn't he doesn't hide his faith. He's not
right.
This isn't a case of well, this is a love song singing about you, and you is actually Jesus, but it could be a girl, or it could be...
There's certainly no ambiguity in the themes, but I think the themes in the story speak for themselves, and it's an obviously Christian story, but it's done so well that it's you're not like, oh well, it was good for what it was.
And I think for me, again, this is where to end with I think that's why I enjoy revisiting these so much. It's interesting. Some books I've thought before, I'd love to experience that for the first time again, or movies like Star Wars, to see it, having not known. With The Lord of the Rings, it's actually the opposite. I think I enjoy it more every time I go back to it.
Well, it's just so rich.
It's not, you almost have to go back to it to start seeing some of the layers to it. But I think, as a creative person, as a writer myself, I think beyond just sort of an engaging story with epic battles and orcs and creatures and heroes, it also kind of just represents a worldview, and then also kind of an approach to creation, to creating art.
Yeah.
Sort of a model that I think more, or I wish more Christians would follow, as far as just
definitely
kind of infusing the art with what we believe about Jesus and God and kind of our Christian faith, without feeling the need to also kind of have our art and stories double as a religious track, or
or as a sermon or whatever.
Yeah, kind of a sermon in story form, but just to really kind of create from our heart that is Christian, and kind of let that just sort of work its way through the story. But hey, if you guys are a fan, maybe if you're not a fan, hopefully we've convinced you to maybe check it out.
Go be a fan.
Yeah, go be a fan. Again, you don't have to go as deep into it as shamelessly as I have.
Few have.
But if you've never read these books, man, I encourage you to do it. Again, you can start with The Hobbit, or you can jump right into The Lord of the Rings. They're very different in tone, but you're not going to get lost either way. But I encourage you, especially if you're a Christian, read these books and kind of through the lens of your faith. And I think you'll find that if you kind of look at it, not that you're searching to try and find, every sentence has to have some deep philosophy, but if you kind of look at it as this sort of, as your faith and what you can kind of learn and be edified through the story, I think you'll find that there's a lot more depth to these books that might appear kind of on the surface of this big action movie. But any final thoughts for you, Sam?
I think that'll do it for me.
Yes, again, if you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. COVID's changed some of our how much reviews and stuff we're putting out, but we're going to be doing a lot more content. Again, the podcast.
It is coming.
The rumored, fabled podcast one day in the not too distant future will be coming. So again, subscribe to our channel so you can kind of keep up to date with what we're doing with that. If you never, I'll link below as well in the description section. If you haven't checked out our website, thecollision.org, we'll have a lot of reviews and articles that we're putting up every week on there. I wrote an article on this, so if you want to kind of see what we talked about in written form, I encourage you to do that. But other than that, guys, hope you guys will stay safe. Let us know what you think of the video in the comments section, and hope you guys will continue to collide with your world for Christ.